The next item on my list is to animate lights. That's a question I got in various shapes and forms in several iterations. Let me go and close ZBrush because we don't need it anymore. And Darrell, you were one who was asking that question, how to make a strobe light. Somebody else wanted to animate a torch inside a cave. So all these things are possible. And I thought I'm going to talk a little bit about it. So the thing about animating lights is that you can't animate all lights. You can animate some lights, but not all lights. Typically, anything that you've created with this menu here, create spotlight, point light, linear point light, distant light, those things, you can animate those, but you can't animate mesh lights. And that's because the light parameters on a mesh light are set on the Surfaces tab, and that is currently not recognized on the timeline in DAZ Studio. There used to be a script, I think it still is there, by Jacques M. Casual. He makes amazing scripts, and one of them was in fact that you can animate certain surface properties in the timeline. But the trouble is that it was written for 3D light, and of course in Iray we have different surface properties, and the emitter property was not something that he had coded, if I understand it correctly. So some surface properties can be animated with his plugin, but the emitter property is not one of them. So one of those things, keep that in mind. So if you have a mesh light, you may just have to create, and you want to animate that, you just have to create a light object, and then you can animate that. So let us create a little primitive first. Maybe a 1 meter plane will be good. That'll be our ground. 1, maybe 2 meters. It doesn't have to have division, so 1 is fine. And Y positive is good. This is our ground now. And I'll just use this as something that will bounce light off in a moment. So I'll call that ground. And then I'm going to create a point light. And we'll just use the default settings. Call it point light. We'll just call it light source. And it doesn't really matter in principle if you use a different type of light object. They just have different properties. I'll go and bring it up a little bit, and we can barely see it here, but that's just because the environment light is currently in Filament, kind of drowning everything out. So let's go and remove that on render settings, environment. And let's turn that to 0. And now everything is black, including what appears to be our light source. So Filament will translate this kind of properly-ish in Filament options. I've got a Filament draw options node here, and the light scene scale, I'm going to set this to 2, maybe to 1, just so that we see the effect of the light here. Filament draw options node, I'm just using that because it's easier to preview this in real time for animations. The correct values you'll have to determine in Iray, of course, but it's one of those things that it's not fluid when you do preview. So if I now go and move my light source up and down, we should see that we see the influence of the light in real time. That's the reason why I'm doing it. So as I bring it closer to the ground, it'll be, smaller and more intense. If I bring it away, it kind of fades away here. So if I go and with my light source selected on the parameters tab on the lights tab here, I have various options, and there's 2 that you can and should animate. One is the intensity option here, and the other one is the luminous flux in Lumen. And intensity is just a slider that goes from 0 to 200, and it allows you light intensity changes within reason, but you can't make bulk changes with it. So let's leave this on 100%. Just know that this parameter can be animated. Then at the bottom here, this is the more important one. This is the luminous flux in Lumen. That's set to 1500, which is the default value is actually very low. So if you go and set this to something higher, then you can see that the light intensity changes. And that's also a parameter that you can animate. BizKids, thank you so much for the super chat donation. I appreciate it. Awesome. That's very kind of you. I appreciate it. Thank you. Yes, if you do want to give via Super Chat, it's the little currency icon at the bottom of the chat. You can click that and then you can drop off a one-off donation into the chat. And your support is greatly appreciated, of course. Not mandatory, but very, very greatly appreciated. So those are the two parameters that will change the light intensity. You can change more, so you can animate the color parameter and all that. But for now, let's go and set the luminous flux value to something like 10,000. Just so that we have some kind of light going here as a base value. And let's bring up our timeline and change this over time. So it works just like setting any other keyframe. The first keyframe is kind of set by DAZ Studio on the bottom left here. If I move this to somewhere else, Dorel, my goodness, thank you so much. That's really nice of you. Fantastic, guys. I appreciate it. Thank you. Super nice. Just like all the other keyframes, when you move your playhead to another position, like say frame 10, and you make a change on any parameter that you want to change, then that's the change that will be locked in. It kind of auto keyframes it. So watch this part of the timeline as I change my luminous flux to say 5,000. As soon as I do that, this demonstration effect, I should see a triangle here, which I don't. What a shame. Oh, I know why that is. I know why that is. I've got to talk about it. If you ever want to set a keyframe manually, you can do this by clicking that little icon down here, create keys. If you do that, now I get this little triangle. So it's temperamental. Sometimes it works automatically, sometimes it doesn't. So it's one of those things. If I go and move my playhead back and forth, you can see that the value of that luminous flux is now interpolated between these two values, which is quite nice. So I'll go and set another one on frame 20 and maybe set this to 0 at that point. And once again, manual keyframe. Some parameters will lock in automatically, like positions and all that. Others will not. Don't ask me why. One of those things. And now we have this value interpolate over time. From here to there and from here to there. And then as the animation goes back around, it'll just go and start from the beginning, at which point it is set back to 10,000 and it just goes and animates up and down. That's essentially how you do it, and you can do it with many other parameters on the lights as well. The difficulty comes in when you say, hey, what if my second keyframe was a little bit too early or too late? How do I change that? How do I go to that exact keyframe and then find out what parameter was actually changed on the timeline? That's where it gets a little bit trickier, but I can help you with that. So as you expand the timeline for this and have a look at the bottom left, you see the object that's currently selected. So in our case, that's the light source. You can select it from the scene tab here, or you can select it directly in here in the timeline. So on light source, if you open that up, you see the properties tab, and currently I don't really see much. I see the general transforms translation and the general transforms rotation, and those are really the parameters that are set over on the general transforms tab under translation and rotation. Scale we don't see here, but that's probably because I filtered it out. So these are the values that we're currently seeing. What we're not seeing is the stuff that is under light and display here. And to bring that into the timeline's view, we need to go and have a look at this little menu here under types. It says TRA currently, so scale is disabled. This is whatever is enabled will be shown as values in the timeline here. Whatever is not ticked will not be shown. So if I enable S, I now see transform, rotation, and scale. I didn't really do anything with those things. So for my light animation right now, I don't need to see these. So if you want to see less stuff in the timeline, you can just go and disable those things. And now we see nothing about our light source, which is, not good. But we also don't see clutter we may not want to see. So what we really need to enable is other here. So enable that. And that will now show us more triangles, namely on the bits and pieces that we've actually set keyframes on. That's kind of cool. So now we have properties. And if I open that, I can see display and light, much I can see up here, display and light. And under light, I can see photometrics. So it's exactly the same folder hierarchy that I saw up here, and in here I see luminous flux, which has changed on these keyframes. So this is now where I can go and move my values around, which is kind of nice. So if I wanted to see my light dim faster and maybe see it dim over the course of 5 frames, I could go and left click and drag my luminous flux keyframe. So left click it to make it yellow, and then you just left click and drag to put it somewhere else. So now over the course of 2 frames, it'll go and dim, or maybe I'll make it over the course of 5 frames. It'll dim down to 5000 already, and then it'll go and dim down much slower. This is how you can create something like flashlights. You can make them dim up or down. I'll show you another way of moving keyframes. There's big confusion about what's a keyframe and what isn't a keyframe. So these round things, they're actual keyframes, but the triangles are also kind of helpful because they show you where keyframes are. Exactly, properties, that's exactly what you need to find. And so on figures, you sometimes don't see this either. If you animate figures and you don't have others selected, then you don't see things like the morph dial. So if you want to animate a figure changing body shape over time, that you may not know where that is. So it's other. There's also aliases and hidden. So some properties are hidden that are also animatable, but by default you don't see them. So if you switch all these on other aliases and hidden, then you see all kinds of other things like shadow, for example. That was a hidden property because I guess we don't have it anymore. It's kind of a 3D light property. We don't really have a shadow option on the on iRay lights anymore, so I suppose they've hidden it that way. So if you don't want to see that because you're not using it, you disable hidden and then shadow will disappear. So play around with this menu and enable and disable the things that you don't want to see or the things that you do want to see. So aliases, looks like I don't think I have aliases right now. Aliases, just in case you're not familiar with that, those are things that give sliders a way to appear in 2 places at the same time. That's an alias. So imagine you had an expression in the head part of the figure, but you want to have that slider available in the root node of the figure as well as in the head. Then you create it on the head and then you set up an alias for that slider and put it somewhere else. There we go. That's what aliases are. You can copy and paste keyframes. Yes, you can do that as well. And that entails, let's go and try this. Say if we have this one here, you can go and right click and copy the selected keyframe from here. Then you park your playhead somewhere else. Let's say here. Let's just say here for argument's sake. And then you go and once again right click and say paste keys. And then the keyframe is pasted. So that's kind of useful. So now the value is dimmed and retained. Well, it isn't actually retained, but it'll just appear there again. I suppose the interpolation is a bit faster, so let's go and move this over here. See if it interpolates. It bizarrely does not interpolate when you copy it. I'm not sure why that is. So the keyframe itself is copied, but the interpolation doesn't work. Answers on a postcard as to why that is, because it shouldn't go to black now, should it? It should interpolate from this value to that value. It clearly doesn't do that. I'm not entirely sure why, but that could well be, I see, this is a bug. I can see that as a bug. This is something we might want to bring to DAZ's attention. NaN in JavaScript means not a number, so I suppose it doesn't know this right now. It's trying to interpolate from here to there. It shouldn't really do that. It should really just stay on 5000 here. Instead it says, hey, I'm trying to interpolate from here to here, and it appears that now you've pasted another keyframe into this. I don't really know what to do. It might help to save the scene and load it again. That is uncool. Let me go delete this keyframe, see if that comes back to life. Yeah, there we go. So under the hood, it's now still interpolating from here to there. Let me see what happens if I paste the keyframe here. Oh, Darrell, we found a bug. Paste the keyframe here. It works at the keyframe, and it also works when there was no interpolated value. So, interesting. I'll bring it to their attention. This is really helpful. This is probably a quick fix. It might also be fixable by just saving the scene and loading it in again. Maybe at that point the timeline has to recalculate the values. Interesting. You can copy and paste multiple by just group selecting them if you wanted to do that. Multiple, and then go and copy keyframes. That is also possible. There's another way of moving things around. And in fact, let me go and put this back to where it came from. And this here, I'm going to go and delete. So imagine you don't open the whole source here. Imagine you don't open the whole properties. I think you can also go and left click this triangle and move all the properties that are here. I don't think you can you copy things? Yeah, you can also copy the whole group of keyframes. So anything that's underneath this triangle, when you go and left click and drag that over, you can also do that. Just be aware that this isn't one keyframe, this is a number of keyframes. This is all the keyframes that are hiding underneath this value. So if you have multiple things that you had animated, like the light intensity and the color, for example, this is a way to do it. You can just left click and drag this whole triangle. That'll also move that. Just know that's not just one keyframe, that's multiple keyframes. Just because I fear I may have screwed things up, I'll go and make myself a new light source, and I'll show you how to animate colors in lights as well. I'll use another point light. I'll call it, I'll just leave it point light, that's cool. I'll move that up. And I can see a little bit of illumination here already, but on the parameters tab under Photometrics, I'm going to go and call it 5000. There. And I like the light intensity. Maybe at frame 15, I like it to be a little bit higher, maybe 10 times higher. That is very high. And then maybe on frame 30, I like it to be 5000 again. And that should now interpolate. Perfect. So it's almost like a pulsating flashlight that we're getting here. That's nice. So let me show you how to animate the color values. Same idea. It's just on the light property. Let's start with white, and then on frame 5, let's make it a different color. Let's make it, I don't know, something like red. Maybe like a darkish type red. That value is also animatable. So now we're going from, we should have set this as white. It didn't have that keyframe, so this is white. The second one is red. So maybe at frame 10, now it'll just naturally interpolate back to where it had the next keyframe, which is here. But maybe at frame 10, I'd like for this to have a color of blue. Kind of a dark blue is good. So now it goes and animates from white to red, from red to blue, which will be an intermediate of green, of course, and then it'll go back to white. So that's kind of nice as well. It's kind of a disco light effect that you can animate there. And if you make it nice and slow, then you can interpolate between colors. So that's kind of nice. So maybe your torch has a bit of a yellowish tint or something, or maybe you have a neon light, like a cyberpunk neon light that shines blue at your character because they're in some kind of neon district in Tokyo or whatever. So that's possible. And the value here, that's just one other thing I wanted to bring to your attention. The keyframe interpolation looks a little bit different here. So if I go into light and color, you see that these keyframes just look slightly different. They don't have the T anymore, they have this little C. And that's because the underlying value isn't a float anymore, so it doesn't interpolate from one value to another. It really interpolates between 3 or 4 values. This is RGB and luminance. That's why this looks a little bit different here. There we go. That's how you animate lights. So it's not actually that difficult if you know where to begin. And you know, I hope it's going to be, yeah, exactly, party, disco party. I hope it's going to make your scenes colorful and your animations even more colorful. Yeah, if you set shortish keyframes for a flashlight, that's the other thing I was going to explain. If you set things short, I'll make a new light for that. If you wanted to make a flashlight is a bit like in a reverse eye blink. It's off, then it goes on, and then it kind of dims down over 3 or 4 frames, but it kind of goes on immediately and then it kind of dims out. That's how you emulate a flashlight. So if you had your fashion models walk up and down a runway and they were to be photographed by people, you could turn this into an anti-block and then just use a flashlight anti-block and have photographers flashing at the model. That's a nice little effect. So let's go and do that. I'll do a point light again because that's just super easy. I'll call it flash light. You can use a spotlight as well, and just like before, I'll go and increase the light value. Actually, I don't increase the light value. Yeah, I will increase the light value to say 5000. So imagine that's now the camera flash. At frame 0, however, we want the intensity to be 0. We want the light to be off. Set a keyframe. And then say at frame 10, or let's say at frame 5. At frame 5, we want it to be off still, so make that another keyframe. So that means between, hello? It doesn't want to set a keyframe. What a shame. Oh, wrong key. Sorry, wrong button. Press the wrong button. So for the first 5 frames, nothing happens. Then over the course of literally 1 frame, we set the intensity to 100%. So that's the flashlight at 100%. Set a manual keyframe. See if these things happen. Nothing, and boom. And then over the course of, I'd say maybe 2 frames, 3 frames, we can play with this. We're going to go and turn the intensity off again. And that's our flashlight. So it doesn't just go on and off, it goes on fast and then just dims out. And if you turn that into an anti-block, then you can just go and loop it and put it in any type, like as many times as you like. We can probably just go and copy these keyframes and put them elsewhere. Let's try that out. That's adventurous. And you can set it as many times as you like. Like if it's like a photographer with a really fast camera, you can just go whatever you like to do. So these are them. Technically speaking, it's just these. So Control and left click to copy them all. And I'll see if it works. Copy selected keys. And I'll just... In fact, yeah, I'll just copy them here. I'll just paste them here. Paste selected keys. Does it work? What does it look like? A flash, there we go. Multiple flashes. You could even, if you wanted to do that, not copy the whole bunch of keyframes. You can just copy the ones that have, like literally these ones here, from off to on to off again. So just copy these 3. And then paste them here, so that way the photographer takes multiple pictures. Paste those here. And then it just goes, like one of those guys who takes crazy amount of pictures in a short amount of time. That's, and if you offset them so that they're not coming in quite so predictably, you can just go and move them around a bit. So like, move that here, move these 3 over to here. We have slightly less repetition in the way these flashes appear. Paparazzi, that's exactly right. And then you know the drill. Turn it into an anti-block and shift it around. I'd probably go and turn 1 flash into an anti-block and then just duplicate the anti-block and move that around on the timeline. All the SOS lights, exactly. Help me, I need to get out of here. So there we go, that's how we can animate lights. I hope that's helpful in your journeys of making the paparazzi effect in your animations. I'm looking forward to that, Darrell. And anyone else who needs to animate torches and everything. So it's hopefully that'll get you on the right track.